One thing I wanted to do that I think would be very, very different, and I've never really seen it done before at a conference, was to kind of give a keynote talking through what inspired me to get to this theme, right? And so I'm going to tell you guys a story and take you on a journey. And it's a very personal journey, but it's also a journey that represents the theme of the conference. And, you know, it was just about a little over 4 years ago that really no one in the software testing industry knew my name or knew about me. And actually, they really didn't even know about Ultimate Software, which is the company that I came to work for. And I look at that now and I look at today, and it's quite different. You know, I've traveled all over the world, and I've gone places, and I've met people that, you know, later on I see their posts on social media and like, today was the best day of my life, I got to meet Tariq King. And I'm like, what is going on? The world must be upside down. And now the community also knows about Ultimate Software. And I really wanted to share a little bit about that journey, because to me, my background was a little bit different. I actually started off in academia, which is why no one in the software testing industry would really know me. And I was a professor for a few years. And then I made the decision to come out of academia and join the software industry. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of doubt, a lot of worry, a lot of fear built inside. Like, would I be good enough for this job? You know, here I am going into a company and I don't have much industry experience. I think I worked for IBM for a few months as a part of an internship, but I really didn't have a lot of experience. But I was going into this because of my background and my doctorate. I was going into this as a test architect, so a relatively senior person. But I wasn't senior in the company. I was just senior on paper, right? And, you know, I think we all have a little bit of imposter syndrome when you start to think about it. And I remember sitting in my new hire orientation, listening to our CTO at the time, Adam Rogers, now our co-CTO. And going into Ultimate was great. They have a good culture, people first culture. But I was more concerned about my career move, right? Like, it's great, I want to be happy at work, that's all fine. But did I make the right career move after spending so long studying the field of software testing and now moving into this company? And at the time, Adam presented something that I thought was quite remarkable. He presented this equation during our new hire orientation. And mind you, this wasn't a new hire for just engineers. This was a general new hire for anyone who joined the company. And he comes up and he presents this equation that Q equals P. So I guess you're wondering what this stands for. Q stands for what? Quality. There we go. But what's the P? Profit? No. People? No. Productivity. Quality equals productivity. And as we know from our basic mathematics, I know we don't like math sometimes, but we always know that whatever happens on one side of an equation happens to the other side. So that means that if quality increases, what he was saying is that from his perspective and from the perspective of his leadership team, productivity also increases. On the converse, if it goes down, then productivity declines. And when he said that, I said, I know that I've joined the right company. Because usually half the battle is actually trying to convince management and trying to give them that perspective, that value on what we do and what we bring to the table. And if the CTO is proclaiming this at new hire orientation to everyone that comes in the company, whether you're a developer, tester, marketing, it doesn't matter, then I feel like that's half of the battle there. And so the story that I'm going to tell you is really going to start with Inspire. And because inspiration is one of those things that is sort of like a drop in water that has this ripple effect that goes for miles and miles. And so it was about 4 years in, 3 to 4 years into my tenure at Ultimate, and I had been a test architect for a while, and I had got to a point where I felt comfortable doing what I was doing. And all of a sudden, I got an invite to go to the Boca Beach Resort, or Boca Beach Club. And it was like one of those situations where I wasn't quite sure why I got invited, because I was still a test architect. I wasn't a leader of any sort. So I get in my car and I drive from Western Florida up to the Boca Beach Resort, and just about a 45-minute drive, not a big deal. But I really didn't have very many expectations. I just felt like, okay, let's go and see what's gonna go on. I get there, it's a beautiful resort, so that's great. I mean, we're in South Florida, so you have to enjoy that while you can. I used to live in Fargo, North Dakota, so I know a little bit about climate change. And as we get there, Adam and his CSO, Julie, are just introducing the retreat. Apparently this resort was someplace that they went to for a long time. Adam's family used to go there as a child, and I was just pretty excited. Like, here I am hanging out with the CTO and all the big guys, but I still didn't know why I was there, right? Like, I just couldn't figure it out. But they were having a leadership summit. And part of that leadership summit was really about inspiring us as what I didn't know was upcoming leaders. They were looking towards me to become a manager in this company. And I don't know about you guys, but at that time, like, I felt like being an architect, that was a beautiful thing, because I got to tell people what to do and stuff, and I had power, but I didn't have to worry about all the other problems that come along with being a people manager, right? I didn't have to worry about your personal life and your PTO and your illnesses and all this stuff. So I was like, I don't know about this leadership thing, and then I was like worried, the technical side that I love and all the testing practices, is that stuff gonna go away? And there was just a lot of stuff going through my mind. But something cool happened, something very cool happened there that I couldn't anticipate. How many people have heard of right to left thinking? Have you ever heard of that? Right to left, a few people? So this was one of the things that they brought at that leadership summit. And what happens is that, like, normally we think about things from left to right. In other words, like, if we're over here, we're in our past, and we kind of walk towards the future thinking about our past to make decisions and trying to help us guide our future, right? We think about our past experiences, and really and truly what that leads to is a little bit of guidance by fear, right? Like, we think about our past, and then the bad things that happen, you don't want to make those mistakes again, and you're kind of focused on that past. But this idea was, instead of thinking left to right, let's start in the future, right? Let's start in the future and imagine that future. Pretend that we are already standing in that future, and let that feeling, like that we've conquered whatever it is we're trying to reach, guide and motivate our actions. So instead of letting the past dictate, you let that promise of that future, pretend that you've attained that future, and then go from there, and then let the rest unfold. So this blew my mind. I never thought about this before, never heard about it. I thought it was great. And I'm a movie fan, so to me it was just like, okay, let's get in the car. Let's get in the car and go to the future. And my boss came and asked me a little bit about what I thought testing was going to be like in the future. And I said, well, you know what? I think in the future, those machines that we have, the software that we have, is going to be able to test itself, and we won't have to do a lot to get it all validated and get our quality practices going, which means that we would become very, very efficient. Because we all know that testing and quality engineering accounts for about 50 to 70% of the cost of development. It's like the most expensive part of development, right? And if the machines are testing themselves, then great. So I had to basically imagine myself in that future where the machines are already doing that, and then try to let that feeling drive and guide my actions, right? And so I did what I called going back to the future, right? In other words, I went way forward, and then I said, let me go 2 steps back to the future, still future, and kind of feel what was happening at that moment, which was 2018, right? Because it was 2015 at the time, so I was still in the future. And started thinking, like, a lot of this stuff that I had been studying, because when I was in graduate school, I studied and focused on trying to build systems that can test themselves. And there's a lot of challenges with that type of a system. And at the time, there was just no great solution. But lo and behold, this whole idea of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we start to see some breakthroughs. And therefore, some of those breakthroughs allowed us to really step into that future and realize some of those challenges and overcome them. And so my whole thing to my boss, my pitch, was that we already have self-testing software, because software is smarter. It can configure itself, it can heal itself, it can protect itself, but to be able to do all that stuff, it needs to be able to test itself, right? Because that's very dynamic behavior. And we've built these agents, these bots, that can go along and do testing by themselves. Now, I didn't know why my boss was asking me this, but this is what I came up with, and I came back to him with. And so, 2016 hits, and Ultimate Software wanted to invest in the future of testing. I mean, that was exciting. But again, I felt that that stemmed from our culture, that Q equals P. What a great culture to have, that here's a company saying, we don't just want to invest in quality now, we want to invest in quality in the future. And right now, testing is very focused on doing manual things, right? We have this manual effort. We talked about it last year, where we're doing a lot of either manual exploratory testing, where the human is involved, or even when we talk about automation, we're doing this scripting, but it's all very manual. It's not very automated at all. And so let's have a grand vision where we're focused on testing with minimal human intervention. You see, I was inspired by that discussion on right-to-left thinking. I was thrilled. And now, everything that I learned in that workshop was coming into fruition in my role as a test architect. I had forgotten all about this manager thing that maybe might happen. I was just happy to be applying what I learned at this leadership summit to my field, right? And so we went on a moonshot. We got money to shoot for the moon. We got money to try to have a team focused on trying to solve this testing problem. It sounds very crazy because it is. That's why you call it a moonshot. And whenever you go on a mission like this, the first thing that you wonder is there anyone else going to the moon with me? Like, is anyone else shooting for the moon? And so, as a good doctoral student would, I remembered my roots. I was always going to have that with me. I said, well, before we start doing anything, let's search and see who's doing what. And so I found some companies. And this is nothing against these companies, but at the time, the more I talked to them about this stuff, it just seemed like they didn't understand some of the core challenges of testing that needed to be solved to do a moonshot project like this. And if you didn't understand the problem, how were you going to solve it? And so I was really disappointed when I started. This is 2016. They had some startups. Here we were trying to do this as part of our HR company, because we build HR software. We don't sell testing tools. And I really couldn't find anyone who had made this a business venture that seemed like they really knew what they were talking about. And so I walked away from there disappointed, but you got to go back into the real world, because just because you get to do a moonshot project doesn't mean that you don't need to keep the lights on, correct? And so when I came back down to earth, the company was saying, hey, you know what? It's great that you're going to work on a moonshot, but we have some challenges right now that we need to solve, And one of those is that we need to make sure we get a grasp of this mobile stuff. Like our mobile product is not up to par, and we really need to make sure that we take care of this. And so we need to make sure that we have a mobile testing strategy in place. And you're the test architect, so guess you get to multitask, right? So no problem. Mobile is a thing, of course. We all know mobile isn't going anywhere. And we all know that there's a lot of testing challenges when it comes to mobile. And so I said, well, let me do what I do best, which is before I start solving this problem, let me go and research what's out there. And so from that point, I got on a plane and I left Western Florida. I left Western Florida and headed up to Las Vegas to the Better Software Conference. And of course, this is a very cool place to go. It's in Vegas, Caesar's Palace. Any excuse to go to Vegas, I guess, right? But I was there on work. And, you know, I attended a talk by a gentleman named Jason Arbin, who at the time had a company, it's a startup company called AppDiff. And Jason was someone who had like some street cred, right? Like he didn't just wake up today and start talking about mobile, right? He had been at companies like Microsoft and Google and UTest. He'd written books on the subject and on testing, so he understood testing. And that was all good. I felt comfortable with what he was delivering on a mobile front. But then he started to show some things at the end of his presentation. He said he'd become very tired of the software testing industry and the way that we test software, and how manual it was, and how much of a pain it was, and how we had not really gone anywhere. And so his idea was to have a whole bunch of robots in the cloud trying to test the software automatically. Now remember, we were always on this moonshot ourselves, and I didn't find anyone who was doing what we were doing. And when Jason opened his mouth to start talking about these things, and I knew that he had some credibility, I was like, I need to go talk to this guy as soon as this talk is done. And so right after the talk, I went up and I told him, hey, we're working on this same problem back at Ultimate Software. We're not focused on mobile, we're focused on the web, but you're doing what I'm doing. It was like a little kid that finally got someone to play with him on the playground, you know? Like, here's my buddy. I got a buddy, like for the first time in this arena, I got a buddy that knows what he's talking about and is doing it. And we started to nerd out right there, talking about the challenges, talking about issues. He started just telling me all that he had went through and all the pain points, and I knew right away that he was the real deal. So that was wonderful. After that, Jason actually inspired me. Like finding that friend on the playground that was doing what I was doing got me so pumped up that I felt I needed to now go and inspire others. So I was inspired to inspire other people. And I went over to the Star West conference, and I just let it all out. I had a lightning talk, just 5 minutes, and I really just wanted to tell the testing community that we are lost. Like we don't have a clue what we're doing when it comes to technology. We're lost and we're way behind, and that testing is lost, and that we needed to bring back testing. And the only way we were going to bring back testing is if we started focusing on doing innovative things. And I didn't really realize what would happen when I finished this talk, because I finished the talk and I get off stage, and Jason is actually at this conference. Now, you saw the video. He's not a small dude, all right? So I get off stage, and he's there with his eyes dilated, staring at me like super pumped up. I thought my life was in danger at that point when I saw how pumped up he was, because whatever I did had now moved him in this space as well. And so when I talk to you about inspiration, it is about, first, we need to make sure that we are inspired ourselves and that we give that back to be able to inspire other people, because that inspiration is what starts, it's the catalyst to doing great things, right? All right, so now we're inspired. But inspiration always only goes so far. The next thing we have to be able to do, and our next chapter is about investing. And an investment is really something that we want to put down up front in hopes of getting some return later on. And so it's like that savings that we're putting in. And this is where a lot of companies don't do very well when it comes to our space. Because you would think that sense testing is so costly and so expensive that we should be putting some money aside to improving, not just getting by, but actually improving and cutting those costs and increasing efficiency. But we don't even do the bottom line that we need to do. Furthermore, go past that. And so, the good thing on my side was that Ultimate Software was investing. They were already investing in this moonshot. And we were chugging along, especially after I found Jason and I had someone to bounce ideas off of and just talk to about the issues and the challenges. And we were back in this wonderful building because we had grown, and we were chugging away at this project codenamed Pterodactyl. And I know what you're thinking, like, why in the world did we call it Pterodactyl? I don't know, I opposed, but the team kind of vetoed me at that point in time. And I guess someone who shall remain nameless, Dione, just named the folder Pterodactyl, and then all of a sudden that was a thing. So we had this huge project, and it was pretty cool. Pterodactyl was able to discover the application automatically and create a whole bunch of states, build a model of that application. Didn't have to feed it anything except the URL to this application. And then it could do things like generate tests. It could interact with the application. It could click buttons. It could check for error messages. It could do all this stuff. So we had a good little prototype going, but better than anything else, Pterodactyl could learn. And even though it might suck at first at doing something, it would get better. And that's the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we were applying this in the context of our applications, and we were talking about enterprise applications. So you can imagine trying to discover an enterprise application, you have to build this huge model. And you have to have a way to deal with the complexity and to drill down into these different states to make sure that the model that you're discovering is actually correct. And we were doing that with a lot of cool technology because, you know, we're technologists. And Pterodactyl could discover the applications that we had built. Now, it might not be able to discover every application that you throw at it, but for our purposes, it was a start. And so the next natural thing is that we need to think about how do we actually take that model, take that information, and start generating tests. And we were able to do that as well. We were able to automatically analyze that application and generate test sequences, fill out forms with test data, use testing techniques, and get results. And we could drill into these results and see the techniques that were employed and also see what steps these bots were taking along the way. It was pretty impressive because even though we still had a far ways to go because we weren't necessarily solving all of these hard challenges like the Oracle, it was at least a start. Like it could tell if something failed and if it blew up in your face, if you had a 404 error or something obviously went wrong, it could tell certain things. And furthermore, like we could understand it as humans because we built in all of that instrumentation into the application. But then we had a hard challenge because we still needed to face those hard problems, right? Like how do you get the system to learn from things like requirements? And we said, okay, well, we got our requirements written in Jira, we got product analysts and business analysts, and let's just start. Let's just try to build something that can interpret natural language and see what we can do, build in mechanisms so that the analyst could start to train these things and say, hey, you know what, this sentence means this or it means that, and go through that whole process. And with the goal of training it to understand those things and then hoping that we could generate tests that are meaningful. And this was the hardest part. It was definitely the hardest part, and still remains the hardest part. And, well, quite frankly, it didn't work that well. We had some challenges with training the system and getting people to use the system to train it to make it better. It was just a little bit of a mess. So we had a good foundation of things, but we weren't really solving this moonshot, right? But it's important to remember that as you go through things, you need to make sure that you have that feedback. And we were having quick turnaround episodes with a team to allow us to determine like how to use the system, if it was working well. And, you know, there were some wins, as you would expect. Like I mentioned, we had that foundation of things. We could explore the application automatically, which was a big win. And then when we came to execute, we had detailed steps that we could go and look at, and it was very debuggable, right? We could even rerun some of those tests and get the system back into that state. But where we had a lot of issues, where we're scaling this thing, it was very memory intensive, very heavy on that. When it came to doing more complex things like deep data generation of complex data, testing techniques, there were still gaps there. And then that trainability issue that I was talking about was a huge, huge issue and problem. But remember, you can shoot for the moon and miss, and it's okay. Because if you shoot for the moon and miss, you might land on a star, right? And you might learn something in the process, and it might help the next person get to the moon. And we weren't really about trying to solve this on our own, because we knew that this problem was a huge problem. And so we were also investing in getting others to help us. And so Ultimate was investing in universities like FIU and the University of North Texas, Dallas, and we were sponsoring their software testing labs and asking them, hey, could you get some graduate students to work on this stuff? That would be great. And we had their faculty, Peter Clark, and we started to work on these problems collectively with their students. So Peter Clark and Renee Bryce from UNT got some students together, and they were working on these problems, and we were learning from whatever they were doing. And it was very cool because, you know, as life would have it, we would hire one of their students onto our team. Worked out for him, worked out for us. And then we had one of our own who would decide that after doing this, this seems like a good area to pursue a master's degree. And so Dione became a student. Then he said, okay, I got the master's, now I might as well do a PhD. And so we had a small little community and academic industry collaboration going, which was wonderful. And we were able to make a lot of progress. We had like 4 different projects running where we were looking at things like self-testing microservices. We were trying to train a bot to be like a domain expert. We were also looking at how to generate tests at a very high level using different machine learning approaches and doing things like stepping into mobile and trying to see if that could be something that would help us, since we had our mobile product and our mobile strategy under our belts. So we saw an opportunity to merge those things. And so we had investment, we had our inspiration, and so naturally, this innovation started to come forth, right? It is like where those ideas become reality. Because that inspiration coupled with investment, with people that really care about their field and understand it, which is also part of the investment, to take those people's time and say, hey, you know what? We know you could test features all day long, but we need you all to start thinking about the future of testing, is what leads to these things that are very innovative. And in 2018, we started to see a lot of that progress. We started to see that we could build a system like the one on the left that could do exploratory testing, that these bots just drill into this thing and start testing. Meanwhile, Jason was making progress on mobile, and his bots were doing exploratory testing on mobile. And there were two very different solutions, and we would share how we did this. And furthermore, we wanted to make sure that we could start sharing with a broader community, because we also both recognized that ourselves, we couldn't solve these problems. Like, we couldn't solve these problems by ourselves, and we needed to start forming a community to help solve these issues. And a lot of things had to come together to be able to do this from our side. We had that pterodactyl project, we had that self-testing and that agent-based framework type stuff. We had that domain expert. We had a lot of learning and abstract learning. We had an underlying framework based on Selenium that helped us to interact with the system under test. And then we even started looking at performance testing and incorporating that. And so that innovation kind of started to propel in 2018. And we ended up with a rather intricate system that could coordinate various agents throughout the system. And we talked about this during the tutorial, and start doing testing. Like, these agents were autonomous, intelligent, and they were able to just start testing software, generating test cases on their own, and doing interesting things like deduplicating those tests and making sure that they're doing efficient testing. And we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. Very complex system, but one that worked and that served as an example that other people could use and other people could look at as a reference. And so we thought, well, what better to do with a system like this than to make it freely available to everyone, right? We're not going to solve the problem ourselves, and we've done a lot of work on pterodactyl, so at least we could do is, like, from our learnings from pterodactyl, open source a project on GitHub called Agent. And Agent is out there for people to grab. And Jason was like-minded. He said, you know what, we've built a lot of classifiers and things that we could train, and he himself hooked up with Jonathan Lips to get part of his framework and his work into Appium for everyone to consume. And so we had these two open source projects in the area of AI for testing as a result of a lot of our investments. So you can now look up elements by using AI. Like, how cool is that, right? At least I thought it was pretty cool, but, you know, I'm nerdy. And in everything we did, because I still had those academic roots, we were publishing. We filed patents. Like, this has to be the output of this thing, because, like, we're doing something novel and innovative, and we want to make sure that it's recognized as such. And we were becoming industry leaders. Like, we started an association around this problem of AI for software testing. We held a virtual conference. We created a tutorial. We created a second tutorial that was held here just the other day, because we're trying to stimulate the innovation in our field in software testing. And AI is here, like, it's here to stay. And we were able to witness some of the coolest things. So we had our tutorial one day, and we had like 70 testers in the room. Now I have like 700 people, so I won't try this experiment here, because I guess 700 people may get angrier than 70 people if the bots beat them at something. But the bots beat them at a simple problem, which was how do we test if an application is trustworthy? You know, this is not one of these simple automation issues, right? This is this kind of qualitative type of problem that is very, you know, user judgment type, touchy-feely kind of thing. And so we asked that question, and 70 testers were pretty stumped as to what they would do to see if the application was trustworthy. And till someone said, oh, you know what, I think I'd look for, you know, funny symbols or foreign characters if it was like in the English App Store or the US App Store. And then it took like another 2-3 minutes before someone said something else. But the machines, after just taking a bunch of examples and getting